So hello everyone, welcome to this Interpore webinar. My name is Maartje Boon and it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Robin Zhao. So Robin Zhao is an associate professor in the Department of Civil Engineering at McMaster University, and his research focuses on multiphase flow and transport in porous materials with applications in climate change mitigation, renewable energy storage, and water security. So Robin earned his bachelor's from the University of Waterloo and both his master's and PhD from MIT, where his doctoral research explored the fluid mechanics of geological carbon sequestration. He then completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Toronto, where he focused on improving the efficiency of electrochemical devices for renewable energy storage. At McMaster, Robin leads a research group that employs advanced visualization and simulation techniques to investigate fundamental phenomena in multiphase flow through porous media. His work also integrates machine learning techniques into digital rock physics, enabling more efficient and accurate characterization of subsurface materials. His research aims to develop practical technologies for reducing carbon emissions and adapting to climate change impacts on hydrologic systems. So thank you very much, Robin, for accepting our invitation.
Of course, thank you.
And your webinar today will be about wettability control of multiphase flow in porous media. And the talk will last about 45 to 50 minutes, and it will be followed by questions. And for the audience, please type your questions in the chat so that we can ask these questions at the end of the presentation. So Robin, if you are ready, please start. We are very much looking forward to your talk.
Yes, let me share my screen. Can you see my screen now, everyone?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Maartje, for the lovely introduction. It's a great pleasure for me to speak today at the Interpore webinar, which I think has been a great resource for our community. So I'm very happy to be speaking here. So today I'd like to tell you a little bit about our research on wettability control of multiphase flow in porous media, which has been ongoing for the past decade or so. And before I start, I just like to acknowledge the people behind the work that I'm going to be presenting today. And they include my former PhD students, Ashkan Ranizad and Mahtab Masuminia, as well as our collaborators, Barjam Primkulov at Yale University, Christopher Mackman at Oxford University, and my own PhD advisor, Ruben Juanes at MIT. Okay, so before we start, let's get some definitions out of the way. So what do we mean by multiphase flow in porous media? Well, to answer this question, let's break it down into two keywords, starting with multiphase flow. So we define multiphase flow as the simultaneous flow of immiscible fluids. And some everyday examples of immiscible fluids include olive oil in water, CO2 bubbles in a can of Coke, or spilled milk flying in the air. And because immiscible fluids, they do not dissolve into each other and are separated by sharp interfaces. Therefore, these interfaces are subject to capillary forces, which are responsible for keeping the drops in their spherical shapes as shown in the pictures here. And so I'll see later in the presentation, capillary forces play a major role in multiphase flow in porous media. So porous media, simply put, is a solid matrix with pores and is a prevalent material on our planet, from geological porous media such as sandstone to synthetic ones such as sponges to biological porous media such as wood. And a common aspect between all of these materials is that the pore spaces serve as conduits for fluid flow. So in our lab, Our motivation for studying multiphase flow in porous media stems from its importance in many key technologies capable of reducing the carbon footprint of our energy systems. And these technologies include geological carbon sequestration, enhanced oil recovery, and renewable energy storage. So now let me introduce the main character of the talk today, which is wettability. And wettability, by definition, is a measure of the liquid's affinity to a solid surface. So for example, water is wetting to the countertop on the left, and it spreads into a thin film. In contrast, water is non-wetting to the lotus leaf on the right, and they bead up into spherical drops. And I'd also like to introduce some related but important terminologies for the talk today. So in the fields of hydrogeology and petroleum engineering, drainage refers to when a non-wetting fluid invades a wetting fluid and displaces it, whereas imbibition refers to the opposite case, when a wetting fluid displaces a non-wetting fluid. So to help illustrate the impact of capillary forces and the drastic difference between drainage and imbibition for flowing porous media, I'd like to show you two simple benchtop experiments. So here, the movie on the top is going to show the evolution of a miscible gravity current, where water is going to spread on top of a denser glycerol water mixture, whereas the movie on the bottom here is going to show the evolution of an immiscible gravity current, where air is going to spread on top of the same glycerol water mixture. So because water is fully miscible with the glycerol water mixture, there's no capillarity between the two. So let me start playing these two movies. And what we see is that in the absence of capillary forces, a miscible gravity current is going to spread indefinitely. So they'll spread forever. And this is very much not the case for an immiscible gravity current, which we see stops at a finite distance. So if we were to take a closer look, we see that at the top, we have air invading glycerol water, and this is a drainage process. Whereas at the bottom, we have glycerol water invading air, and this is an imbibition process. And what we find is that the hysteresis between drainage and imbibition imposes a pinning effect that prevents the thickness of the buoyant current from decreasing below the capillary height delta Hc. So to understand the pore scale mechanisms at play, we conducted the same type of experiments in a micro model. In this case, we had etched cylindrical posts to mimic the solid grains in porous media. And the advantage of these micro models is that we can directly visualize the magnitude of the capillary pressure, which is inversely related to the radius curvature of the pore scale fluid-fluid interface. And the smaller radius curvature corresponds to higher capillary pressure. So in this example here, you can clearly see that the capillary pressure at the top, where drainage occurs, is much higher than at the bottom, where imbibition occurs. And this difference in capillary pressure must be offset by the increase in hydrostatic pressures, leading to the pinned interface. And the height of the pinned interface, delta Hc, we find scales linearly with the inverse of the bond number, which measures the relative importance or relative strength between capillarity and gravity. So another example that clearly illustrates the significant difference between drainage and imbibition is the classical experiments of Stokes et al. Here we see that the morphology, the displacement pattern broadens as the invading fluid becomes more wetting to the porous media. So at the top here, we have a more wetting fluid that is displacing a non-wetting fluid. In this case, this is imbibition processes. And we find that the ensuing viscous fingering instability have a characteristic width that is much larger than the typical pore size. And the bottom here, we have a non-wetting fluid invading a wetting fluid. And this is a drainage process. In this case, we see that the finger width is on the order of the pore size. So they're drastically different from each other. So in our research, we study the impact of wettability on multiphase flow in simple, idealized porous media using microfluidic devices. And as illustrated before, these microfluidic devices, or micromodels, as we like to call them, allow direct visualization of the fluid flow interfaces, and they can be fabricated with controlled geometry and controlled wettability conditions. So the material that we'd like to use to achieve controlled wettability conditions is a thylene-based polymer called NOA81 or NOA81. And NOA81 has a property of becoming hydrophilic when exposed to high energy UV light. And we show that the contact angle of NOA81 surfaces can be continuously tuned by changing the exposure time. So in the plot here, the blue circles here are showing the contact angle of water in the presence of air. And the red circles here are showing the contact angle of water in the presence of silicone oil. And we see that indeed, by increasing the exposure time, the contact angle continuously decreases. And the right here, we had experimented with generating a wettability gradient on NOA81 surface. So what we do is we put a NOA81 surface beneath a UV blocking mask. And the UV blocking mask is being pulled by a pulley. So as the mask is being pulled, it gradually reveals the NOA81 surface at the bottom, which is then subject to UV exposure. And we see that indeed, by this very simple method, we're able to generate a NOA81 surface with a wettability gradient. So in addition to making quasi two-dimensional micromodels of posts, we have also fabricated spherical beads made of NOA81. So here, I'm going to show you two movies where we deposit water onto NOA81 bead in a chamber that is filled with silicone oil. So the first movie on the left here is water deposition on a NOA81 bead that has not been treated. And in this case, we see that the water just sits on top of the NOA81 bead. And the movie on the right here, I'm going to show you what happens when we deposit water on a UV treated NOA81 bead. So in this case, the NOA81 bead is going to be very hydrophilic. So what we see is that as soon as the water touches the bead, it pulls the bead up due to surface tension.